When Shaquille O'Neal walked into the Meridian Club on the 44th floor of the Hargrove Tower in downtown Chicago on the evening of a Wednesday in early March, the annual Titan Summit dinner was 90 minutes underway, and the room had achieved the particular atmosphere of an event where the people in it have already decided they are the most important people in any room they enter, and are now performing that certainty for each other. The tables were round, 10 to a table, white linen and low floral arrangements designed not to obstruct sightlines, because sightlines mattered to people who needed to be seen seeing and being seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the north and east walls showed Chicago from the 44th floor, which is high enough that the city looks like a diagram of itself. Ordered, legible, the lake a dark edge beyond the grid. The Titan Summit was an invitation-only gathering of 50 of the country's most prominent business leaders, convened annually by a private consortium. And the invitation was considered by those who received it as a form of confirmation that they had arrived at the level where such confirmations were possible. He had been invited 3 years running. He had declined the first 2 because the dates had conflicted, and the third because he had been unconvinced the evening would produce anything worth the flight to Chicago. He had accepted this year because of a conversation 4 months ago with a woman named Vanessa Cole, who ran the workforce reentry program in Orlando and who had told him, over the same coffee where she had described the transportation problem that led to the Pinnacle Motor Group acquisition, that the Titan Summit's organizing consortium had recently launched a small business mentorship initiative that was, in her words, 2 good ideas wrapped in 10 bad ones, and that the good ideas needed someone in the room willing to say so out loud. He had flown to Chicago. He was wearing a dark navy suit, single-breasted, no tie, the collar of a white shirt open at the throat. He had the suit. He wore it when the room required it. He did not wear a tie because he had made a decision about ties in 1999 that he had not revisited. Philip's watch, the same watch always, on the left wrist. The plain face and the brown leather strap that had been replaced twice now, because the watch was not replaceable. He was seated at table 7. He found his place card. He sat. He noticed 3 things in the first 10 minutes. First, at the center of each table, beside the floral arrangement, a small printed card listing the table's guests with one-line professional identifiers. His card read, Shaquille O'Neal, entrepreneur, philanthropist. 2 words, clean. He turned the card over. The back was blank. Someone had made a decision about how much 2 words could carry and had made it incorrectly. Second, at the podium near the north wall, the evening's moderator was concluding remarks about the small business mentorship initiative that Vanessa had described. The remarks were fluent and well-paced and contained, in Shaq's estimation, approximately 40% of the relevant information and none of the structural problems. The applause when the remarks concluded was the kind of applause that rooms like this produce for things they have not fully heard. Third, from the table to his left, table 6, the nearest table close enough for conversation to travel across the gap if conversation were inclined to travel, a voice, carrying. The voice of someone who has learned, through decades of being listened to, that volume is a form of punctuation. The man attached to the voice was speaking to the 2 people beside him with the posture of someone delivering verdicts rather than opinions. He had not looked at table 7. He was about to. Shaq noted all 3. He unfolded his napkin. He waited for the room to show him what it was. Now, here is what the man at table 6 did not know, and what the 2-word identifier on the place card had left out, and what a woman named Clara Osai had written in a letter to a foundation in Atlanta 14 months ago that was connected to every person in this room in a way that none of them had been told. Clara Osei was 28 years old and was David Akeampong's daughter's closest friend, and had grown up 3 blocks from the Triumph Sports and Goods flagship on Vine Street, and had attended, on a Thursday in November 11 months ago, the first Community Learning Day on Whitmore Lane in Buckhead, where she had sat in Harriet Osei's rose garden and heard an explanation of how to plant for 40 years rather than one, and had written it in a notebook because she had a habit of writing the things that lasted and discarding the things that didn't. She had also, in the past 14 months, launched a small business, a tutoring and test preparation service operating out of a converted garage in Vine City that had grown from 3 clients to 31, and that was now at the edge of the expansion that requires more capital than a garage and 3 clients can accumulate. And that had been rejected by 2 small business loan programs because her credit profile had not yet caught up with the velocity of what she had built. She had written to the foundation. The foundation had forwarded the letter to Simone, the Community Preservation and Development Coordinator. Simone had reviewed it. Simone had put it on the agenda for the Thursday call. Shaq had read it on the Thursday call and had said, "What does she actually need? Not the loan amount, not the business plan summary. What does she actually need?" Simone had said she needed someone in a room with capital to take the question seriously, rather than running her profile through a filter designed for a kind of business she was not. He had come to Chicago because Vanessa Cole had told him the Titan Summit had 2 good ideas wrapped in 10 bad ones. He had come because Clara Osei needed someone in the room with capital to take the question seriously. He had come because the place card at table 7 said entrepreneur, philanthropist on the front, and nothing on the back. And the nothing on the back was, in his estimation, the most inaccurate thing in a room full of people whose accuracy about themselves was generally approximate. He had not come to perform. He had come to work. His name was Preston Hargrove III. He was 58 years old and was the 3rd generation of the family whose name was on the building they were in. And he had grown up with the specific confidence of someone who had been told from the beginning that the rooms where things were decided were rooms he was expected to occupy, and had occupied them, and had been confirmed in that expectation often enough that the expectation had become invisible. Not arrogance, exactly, not the kind that requires tending. The kind that has become structural, load-bearing, present in every room, because it has stopped needing to announce itself. He had run Hargrove Capital for 19 years. He had made 12 investments above $100 million in that time, 4 of which were considered canonical in the private equity literature that the people in this room read and assigned to their analysts. He had been on the cover of 2 magazines. He had spoken at this summit for 6 consecutive years, from the position of the person who had built something large enough that the summit organized itself partly around the fact of his presence. He had grown up in Winnetka, the eldest of 3, in a household where the language around money was precise and early and total, not as aspiration, but as atmosphere. His father had told him once, at a dinner very much like this one, that the difference between people who moved capital and people who were moved by it was the willingness to make decisions in the absence of certainty. And that willingness was trained, like a muscle, and that the training required rooms with the right other people in them. He had taken this seriously. He had spent his career curating the rooms with the right other people. He had, over time, developed a taxonomy of who the right other people were that had served him well by the metrics he used to measure the service, and that had never been examined by any metric that those metrics did not include. He had looked at Table 7 when the seating announcement was made, and he had read the place card identifier, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and had filed the information with the efficiency of someone whose filing system was very fast and had never been audited. He looked at Table 7 again now, 40 minutes into the dinner, because the man at Table 7 had asked the evening's moderator a question during the brief open Q&A that had followed the mentorship initiative remarks. And the question had been specific and structural, and had identified in 2 sentences the precise location of the initiative's central design flaw, in a way that the moderator had not been equipped to answer and had deflected. And the deflection had been smooth, but the question had stayed in the room, the way good questions stay. He said, across the gap between table 6 and table 7, at a volume the gap did not require, the athlete. You had a question about the mentorship structure. Shaq looked at him. I'm Preston Hargrove, the man said. He said his name the way people say names that are on buildings. I chair the consortium. If you have a concern about the initiative, the appropriate channel would be the post-dinner feedback session. Shaq said, I'll use whatever channel is open. The question stands regardless. The question assumed a structural problem that the initiative's design committee has already addressed. The question identified a structural problem that the initiative's current design contains, Shaq said. Those are different claims. One of them is accurate. There was a quality to the silence that followed that the people at the nearest tables registered without turning to look, which is the most attentive kind of listening. Hargrove said, Your background is entertainment, sports. You built a brand. He said brand the way people say words when they have decided the word is diminutive. The architecture of a capital deployment initiative isn't really your terrain. Shaq said, What's your average check size for first-time founders? A pause. It varies. Ballpark. We look at opportunities above 2 million in addressable market. And below? Below 2 million is not typically a productive allocation of. Below 2 million is where Clara Ose is, Shaq said. He said the name carefully, with the weight of someone for whom the name is not a rhetorical device, but a specific person. She runs a tutoring program in Vine City. 31 clients. 60% year-over-year growth. Rejected by 2 small business loan programs because her credit profile doesn't fit the filter. She doesn't need 2 million. She needs 40,000 and someone in a room like this to take the questions seriously instead of running her through a filter designed for a different kind of business. He looked at Hargrove steadily. Your initiative, as currently designed, cannot reach her. That's the structural problem. Hargrove looked at him. He looked at the 2-word place card. He said, with the smoothness of someone who has delivered this sentence before and considers it a closing argument. The initiative is designed to scale. Individual cases are not a design framework. And frankly, with respect, you are an entertainer who made a lot of money and found some good causes. You're not a capital allocator. You're not in this room because of what you built. You're in this room because of what you are. He paused. He said, In the architecture of what we do here, you're nothing. He said the last 2 words with the specific confidence of someone who believes them completely and has never had occasion to test them against a room that included the person he was saying them about. The table went quiet. The tables around it went quiet in the sequence of a stone dropped in still water. 6, 7, 8, nearest first, then the next ring, then the next, until the room had reached the particular silence of 47 people who have registered that something has happened and are waiting to understand what. Shaq looked at Preston Hargrove III for a moment. The stillness was complete. His hands were flat on the white linen. His expression was the expression his mother had given him for exactly this category of moment. Not blank, not performing, but fully present in the way that requires more control than anger and more courage than retreat. He said 3 words. He said, "Watch me work." He said it quietly. He said it without heat and without performance. He said it the way his stepfather had said the things he was most certain about, flatly, as a statement of what was going to happen rather than a declaration of feeling about what had just occurred. Then he turned back to the moderator. He said, "I'd like 5 minutes at the end of the evening. I want to propose a modification to the mentorship initiative's lower threshold structure. If the consortium is interested in reaching the people its current design cannot reach, I have a framework that can do it." The moderator looked at Preston Hargrove. Preston Hargrove was looking at the man at table 7 with an expression that was moving, slowly, through several stages of something that had not yet completed its arrival. He said, 5 minutes. He said it to the moderator. He did not look away from table 7 when he said it. You need to wait just a little longer before the 5 minutes, because before you hear what was said in them, you need to know what was in the leather portfolio that Shaq had carried into the Meridian Club and set under his chair at table 7 and not opened until now. The portfolio contained 4 documents. The first was a 1-page summary of Clara Osei's tutoring program, the 31 clients, the growth rate, the capital need, the rejection history, the specific design flaw in each loan program that had rejected her that made her rejection structurally inevitable rather than merit-based. The second was a 2-page framework for a sub-threshold small business program. His team had built it over 3 weeks, working from the model that Simone had been developing for 2 years, that could operate within an existing consortium structure and reach businesses below the 2 million addressable market threshold that Hargrove Capital's current filter excluded. The third was a list of 23 businesses in 11 cities that the framework would have reached in the previous fiscal year if it had existed. The fourth was a letter. Handwritten, 3 pages, on plain paper. The handwriting was careful, the kind that takes time. The letter was from Harriet Osei. She had written it not because anyone had asked her to, but because she was 76 years old and had been planting things for 41 years and had developed, in that time, a precise understanding of the difference between a gift and an investment. A gift was what you gave when you wanted to feel that you had done something. An investment was what you made when you intended the something to keep growing after you had stopped tending it. She had written the letter to say that what had been done on Whitmore Lane was an investment, not a gift, and that she knew the difference because she had been on the receiving end of both kinds, and only one of them had roots. He stood at the podium at 10:47 p.m. with the 4 documents and the portfolio. He spoke for 4 minutes and 38 seconds. He described Clara Osei. He described the structural problem in the consortium's initiative. He described the framework. He read 3 sentences from Harriet Osei's letter, the 3 sentences about gifts and investments and roots, because they were the most accurate description of what he was proposing that he had found in anything he had written himself. He did not look at table 6 while he spoke. He looked at the moderator and at the people at the tables. He could see who were listening with the forward attention of people hearing something they had not yet heard in this room, and at the north wall with the city below it and the lake beyond, because it helped him to look at a city from a height when he needed to remember that rooms and their hierarchies are not the largest thing. When he finished, the applause was different from the applause after the initiative remarks. It had a different quality. It was the sound of people who had heard rather than witnessed. Preston Hargrove did not applaud immediately. He sat with his hands folded on the white linen for approximately 4 seconds, which is a long time to not applaud in a room where applause is the currency of approval. Then he applauded, not performatively, the way people clap when they have decided something rather than performed it. He came to table 7 after the formal program concluded. He stood at the edge of the table. He said, "I owe you an apology." Shaq said, "You owe Clara Osei a phone call." Hargrove looked at him. He said, "What I said to you was wrong." "It was," Shaq said. "And the apology is accepted. And the phone call is still the next thing." Hargrove said, "I don't know who Clara Osai is." "You will," Shaq said. He took the first document from the portfolio and he placed it on the table. The one-page summary. Clara's 31 clients, her growth rate, her capital need, her rejection history. "She's not in your filter," he said. "That's the point. She shouldn't need to be." Hargrove picked up the document. He read it. He was the kind of reader who was fast because he had read a very large number of documents and had developed the ability to identify what a document was about in the first paragraph and confirm it in the last. And he did this now, and then he went back to the middle, which is where the detail lives, and read that too. He said, 60% growth. Year over year, Shaq said, from a converted garage, without the capital she needs. Hargrove said, "Send me the full framework." "It's in the portfolio," Shaq said. He handed it over, all 4 documents. The framework, the 23 businesses, the summary, the letter. He kept nothing back. Hargrove held the portfolio. He said, "The letter. Whose is it?" "A woman named Harriet Osai," Shaq said. "She's been planting things for 41 years. She knows the difference between a gift and an investment." Hargrove was quiet for a moment. He said, "I'd like to read it." "It's in the portfolio," Shaq said. Hargrove read it that night, in the car back to Winnetka, with his reading glasses on and the portfolio open on his knees. His driver, who had been driving him for 11 years and had learned the quality of silences that the back seat required of him, kept the car quiet. Hargrove read all 3 pages. He read the 3 sentences about gifts and investments and roots twice. He looked at the city going past the window. He thought about his father at a dinner like this one, saying that the difference between people who moved capital and people who were moved by it was the willingness to make decisions in the absence of certainty, and that the willingness was trained like a muscle. He thought about what muscle he had been training for 19 years and whether the training had produced the thing he had told himself it was producing. He called Clara Osei on the Thursday morning. She answered on the second ring, which is how she answered calls from numbers she did not recognize. On the second ring, not the first, because she had learned that answering on the first ring communicated an urgency that shifted the power of the conversation before it had begun. And she had learned this from a business coach who had donated 2 sessions to her program through a foundation she had never met the donor of. He said, "My name is Preston Hargrove. I'm calling about your tutoring program." She said, "How did you get this number?" He said, "Someone who reads your letters." There was a pause. She said, "Which letter?" He said, "The one to the foundation in Atlanta." I read the summary. She was quiet for a moment, with the particular quiet of someone calibrating. She said, "What do you want to know?" He said, "Everything." She told him everything. It took 40 minutes. He asked 11 questions. She answered all 11 without simplifying any of them, because she had been telling the story of what she had built for 14 months to people who had run her through filters, and she had learned to tell it completely, at the risk of the completeness being too much. Because the people who could handle the completeness were the only ones she wanted in the room. He could handle the completeness, the investment, not a grant, not a loan. An equity participation structured to give Clara operational control and Hargrove Capital a minority stake with a 5-year growth covenant was announced 6 weeks later. $42,000, structured exactly as Shaq's framework had described. The announcement named the Titan Summit Mentorship Initiative as the context in which the investment model had been developed, which was the accurate description. And it named Clara Osai's program, which was the important one. Philip Harrison had said, A door closed for the wrong reason is a door that needs to be taken off its hinges. He had also said once, on a Sunday morning over a chessboard, with the kitchen window letting in a gray Newark light, not to Shaq, to himself, in the way people say things to themselves when they have forgotten they are not alone. The people who say you are nothing are usually counting the wrong things. He had not explained what the right things were. He had not needed to. The right things were the ones that kept growing after you stopped tending them. Lucille O'Neill had said, owning something is not the point. What you do with the owning is the point. She had also, on the specific evening when Shaq had come home from a recruiting visit where someone had tried to make him feel small, sat across from him at the kitchen table and said, "You let them define nothing. You define everything. And then you go work." She had said it once. She had not needed to say it again. Watch me work. 3 words, said quietly, without heat. At a table in Chicago on a Wednesday evening in March, to a man who had counted the wrong things and called the total nothing. By the following fiscal year, the Titan Summit Consortium had adopted the sub-threshold framework as a permanent program track. 14 businesses were funded in the first cycle. Clara Osei's program was not among them, because Clara Osei's program had already been funded by a man in a car in Winnetka reading 3 sentences about gifts and investments and roots, and did not need to be. She hired her first employee 6 months after the investment closed. The employee was a recent college graduate named Amara. Not the Amara from Memphis, a different Amara. This one from Vine City, one of the first children to attend the Community Learning Day on Whitmore Lane, who had sat in Harriet Osei's rose garden and heard about planting for 40 years and had written it in a notebook and carried the notebook to a job interview 14 months later and read from it when Clara asked her why she wanted to work in education. She had said, "Because things that are planted right keep growing after the person who planted them stops tending." Clara had said, "When can you start?" A journalist from a regional business publication had attended the Titan Summit on a press credential and had been in the room when Shaq spoke from the podium and had been at the right angle to hear the 3 words said at table 7 before the podium and had written them into her notes in the moment, and had built a story around them that ran on a Thursday and was the most read piece the publication had run in 14 months. Which was not because of the 3 words alone, but because of what the 3 words turned out to be attached to, which was Clara Osei and Harriet Osei's letter and a framework for reaching 31 clients in a converted garage that a $2 million filter could not see. The headline used the 3 words. It did not need anything else. Preston Hargrove III read the article on the Thursday it ran. He read it in the same car, on the same route, with his reading glasses on. He read to the end. He sat with the last paragraph for a while. Then he said to his driver, who had been driving him for 11 years and had heard him say many things in the back of the car, and who knew the difference between the things said for the room and the things said for the record, "Change the filter." His driver said, "Sir?" "The investment filter," Hargrove said. "I want it changed. Get me the framework from the portfolio." His driver said, "The one from the man at table 7. "That's the one," Hargrove said. He looked out the window at Chicago going past, and he thought about buildings with names on them, and rooms at the top of those buildings, and the people in those rooms, and the people not in those rooms, and the distance between those 2 categories, and whether the distance was the size it needed to be, or the size it had been allowed to become, because no one in the room had been required to look at it until a man in a navy suit with no tie had set a leather portfolio under his chair at table 7 and waited for the room to show him what it was. The room had shown him. He had worked. Watch me work. He always had. He always would. Drop a comment right now and tell us, what are the 3 words you would say to the person who told you that you were nothing? Because this community has heard that sentence and survived it, and we want to hear yours. If this one landed somewhere in you that you were not ready to find, tap the like button. For every Clara Ose in a converted garage whose credit profile doesn't fit the filter, but whose growth rate tells the whole story. Subscribe if this is your first time here, because we only build things that last, and the next story is already waiting for you. We will see you there.